Okay, welcome to part 2 of psychological disorders. And here we're going to look at schizophrenia, mood disorders, and just touch on a couple of other psychological disorders. Okay, when we're looking at schizophrenia, it's really important to pay attention to, well, we'll first go over what it is, and then we'll divide it into two parts, which is to say that there's positive symptoms and negative symptoms. So first, schizophrenia is a severe psychological disorder characterized by a loss of contact from reality, hallucinations, delusions, inappropriate or flat affect, which is just meaning your demeanor looks very flat, not very high or low, just very middle road on everything. Nothing makes you very happy and nothing makes you very sad. Some disturbances in thinking, social withdrawal, and or other bizarre behavior. Schizophrenia most often emerges in adolescence and early childhood, partly because there's a different theories and it's related to stress, and it could have a genetic component. So the genetic component is only really just made overt with the level of stress that adolescence and early adulthood introduce. Now, like I said, there's two types of symptoms. There's positive symptoms and negative symptoms. And you'll see more of this on page 202 and 203 of your text. The abnormal behaviors that are present in people with this disorder, abnormal behaviors present in people with the disorder include, so this is things that are observed by them: hallucinations, delusions, delusions of grandeur and delusions of persecution, grossly disorganized behavior, and inappropriate affect. These are observable behaviors typically, but they're not complete of what is schizophrenia and its symptoms. We look at the negative symptoms and we see a loss of or a deficiency in thought and behaviors. They're characteristic of normal functioning, but negative symptoms include social withdrawal, apathy, loss of motivation, lack of goal-directed behavior, very limited speech, slow movements, poor hygiene, poor problem solving, and distorted sense of time. Now, these would be things that we might see in a lot of other sort of psychological disorders, but combined is what makes up some of the symptoms that would be observed for psychiatrists to make a diagnosis. Now, there are four sorts of schizophrenia: catatonic, paranoid, disorganized, and undifferentiated. When you think of catatonic, it's a complete, it's an odd version of schizophrenia. It's not likely one that you've seen. Complete stiffness or stupor, great excitement or agitation, frequently alternating between rapidly between the two. They bang back and forth between this sort of complete stillness and excitement and agitation. And they often go through this period of assuming an unusual posture, as the graphic shows underneath catatonic there. And they remain in the pose for a very long period of time. Now, this isn't the most common variety, but it is a very significant variety of schizophrenia. Now, paranoid schizophrenia is probably one you're more frequently aware of. It's characterized by delusions of grandeur or delusions of persecution, where they're convinced they have an identity other than their own, or that they possess great ability or talent, often show exaggerated anger and suspiciousness, and feel that they're being harassed or threatened. They may become violent to defend themselves against imagined persecutors. The behavior is not disturbed as other types, not as disturbed as other types, but the chances of recovery are much better with paranoid schizophrenia. Now, in any of the examples of schizophrenia, they are themselves not a violent disorder or a violent psychological disorder. Oftentimes, if there's violence, it's towards the hallucinations, not towards people who might be their unintended targets. Disorganized schizophrenia is the most serious type. Extreme social withdrawals, hallucinations, delusions, silliness, inappropriate laughter, grotesque mannerisms, flat or inappropriate affect. They're frequently incoherent to the point that they will talk as if They are making sense, but there's no intelligible words coming out. They may exhibit obscene behavior, may swallow almost any kind of object or material, and it results in the most severe disintegration of personality. This has got the poorest chance of recovery. Then the last is what's called undifferentiated schizophrenia. And essentially this is a catch-all term used when schizophrenic symptoms either they don't conform to the criteria of one type of schizophrenia or they conform to more than one type of schizophrenia. Now, causes for schizophrenia can include genetic inheritance. You can see a graph on page 205. The diathys stress model basically says that there's a genetic disposition. There's a cup that's got liquid in it, and the genetic disposition is some degree of fullness of this glass is what you are genetically predisposed towards. And then the stress part of the model is the stress that the individual and what you can handle adds more to that cup. Now, in the example where you have a predisposition that's filling the cup up quite significantly and you add stress, it allows that cup to overflow, then schizophrenia, if it's predisposed in you, will show up. Another explanation for schizophrenia is excessive dopamine activity. Now, if we move into mood disorders, disorders characterized by extreme and unwarranted disturbances in emotion or mood. The major depressive disorder is marked by feelings of great sadness, despair, hopelessness, as well as the loss of ability to experience pleasure. Now, major depressive disorder isn't just about being sad for just a couple of days. We're talking about, again, 6 months or more, marked by despair, hopelessness. I mean, these aren't just, I'm feeling sad today. These are hurting major depressive states. Symptoms: changes in appetite, weight, sleep patterns, loss of energy, difficulty in thinking or concentrating, not able to hold a thought, psychomotor disturbances, slowed body movements, reaction time, speech, sometimes fidgeting and constant motions, wringing of hands and pacing, psychotic depression, delusions, hallucinations. I mean, it's very debilitating. Many receive antidepressant drugs. Studies reflect psychotherapy can be equally effective. Reoccurrence of the disorder, this is when it seems to have subsided and yet seems to come back, as 50 to 60% of the patients will have a reoccurrence. This reoccurrence is greatest for females and when the initial onset is before age 15. May be frequent or infrequent, that's about 20 to 35% of the patients, where it's chronic, lasting more than 2 years. Medications are often used, psychotherapy, social support, even exercise as preventative measures. Continuing in mood disorder, the term bipolar used to be called manic depressive. Bipolar is a mood disorder in which manic episodes alternate with periods of depression, usually with relatively normal periods in between. A manic episode, excessive euphoria, inflated self-esteem, wild optimism, hyperactivity, temporary lost touch with reality. Mania isn't a great ride. Mania is being out of control at a very high level. Frequently, there's delusions of grandeur along with euphoric highs. May waste large sums of money and get rich schemes. You think you have it all figured out. Likely to become irritable, hostile, enraged, or dangerous if stopped. May be hospitalized to protect themselves from disastrous consequences. Now, there's about 1% of the Canadian population, and it's a fairly equal distribution between men and women in terms of the prevalence of bipolar. Usually the onset begins in late adolescence or early adulthood, but 90% have reoccurrences and about 50% within the first year of recovery. You will find that many manage this disorder, and many people can manage this disorder and lead normal lives with the aid of medications. Psychotherapy helps cope with the stress of chronic mental illness. Causes can be anything from genetic inheritance, the role of serotonin and norepinephrine. Cognitive and faulty distorted thinking processes can be a strong contributing factor. When you look at some of these personality disorders, what you're seeing in here is a collection of what we've sort of reviewed here, basically. And you're seeing personality disorders that tend to be long-standing, inflexible, maladaptive patterns of behaving and relating to others, which usually begin in early childhood or in adolescence. The characteristics of personality disorders: extremely difficult to get along with, unstable work and social histories. They know their behavior causes problems, yet they seem unable to make any changes. They blame other people for situations, for their problems. Treatment options are usually few. Most seek treatment by legal authorities or family members, seldom engage in self-reflective, essential for success. Psychological and behavioral factors that can lead to personality disorders diagnosed may be resolved with some degree, but may become less severe over time. These can be very difficult to manage, but certainly you'll find that treatment usually includes medications and counseling. Now, you may find this subject matter very interesting, and I would recommend taking Abnormal Psychology to get a more in-depth look at the kind of conditions that have been expressed in this chapter. So good luck.